Well, what I thought was I'd do just a brief introduction and then we would spend the time in prayer, really. And I'd start us off, if you would join me in it, on Matthew 15. And I think I can testify, and I think I just, record all this, Marty, so that we have it, the lessons as well. You could turn it off, when we begin to give ourselves to prayer, then that's okay. Matthew 15 and verse 3. Really, verse 1 gives the context. Then Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, "Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat." He answered them, "And why do you transgress the commandment of God for the sake of your traditions? For God commanded, 'Honor your father and your mother,' and he who speaks evil of father or mother, let him surely die. But you say, 'If anyone tells his father or his mother, what you would have gained from me is given to God, he need not honor his father.' So for the sake of your tradition, you have made void the word of God. You hypocrites! Well did Isaiah prophesy to you when he said, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines as precepts of men.'" And there, of course, Jesus is commenting on the term Corban. You remember, if you said, "This is Corban," I'm giving it to God, so I don't need to provide for my parents, And that always spoke to me as a little guy in Craigie Methodist Church in Belfast, because I don't know why we were close to each other. I often think of it, maybe my mother's background, might have brought it about. But it was my father and my mother and Desmond and I, just a little family of 4. But we were very close. Now, I don't know why it was. Probably the war too helped, But we did everything together, We two boys stayed, played games at night with our dad and mum, It was just a very close home. And I think even closer probably than Irene's was, though I think, who can tell. But therefore, this always spoke to me. This was Jesus standing up for respect for parents, for respect for dads and mums, and for loving them. And so that was very real to me right from earliest days. And probably, I'm sure I'd rather have been more a kind of a man's boy like Marty. I was a man and a boy. I had no trouble with my sex. But I certainly was very close to my mum and dad. Now, maybe you were too at church, but I would sit in their pew, where it came to 12, 13, when you start beginning to go with the crowd, I would still sit. Out of respect, wanting them to know that I love them more than I love my friends. Dumb stuff, but that was the setup, So very close, parents and children, and this kind of spoke to me strongly. So that it was a massive change when I felt God calling me to the ministry, and realized that my mum was not all that enthusiastic about it, and that there was a bit of resistance there. And so I began to realize now this this is going to cause some break in the family. And of course, it was most obvious then when, by that time, my brother had created quite a bit of excitement in the family. In other words, I was the good guy, he was the bad guy. And so there were lots of fights, lots of battles, lots of arguments. And it came to the point where I believed God was calling me to the ministry. And I remember it very well. My dad and I were like that all the time. And I was 17, 18 maybe. And I sensed that, I'm sorry, then it was after that, I had the opportunity to teach in my school, my own grammar school, and I could go as a resident master and stay there, even though it was just the other side of town. And so the question was, do you do that or not? By this time I had gone through seminary. No, I hadn't gone through seminary, I'm sorry. I'd got a first degree in English literature and a teaching degree and was ready to teach. And so I was going out to teach. And I said to Dad, well, what do you think, Dad? Should I stay here, And so that was important for me, were you going to break with these two people that were so dear to you? And of course he said, well, you'd have peace to write sermons, So that was a big thing. I moved out, and really, I think, but did move back for a year later on, but that was virtually it. But that was a big break. How did I do it? Well, it was this old Bible, Matthew 10. And I tell it this way, despite the stupid tears, so that you realize that for some people it did mean, it meant a lot, Matthew 10 and 37. Well, in fact, 34 was wild, It was hard for me to take 34. Do not think that I have come to bring peace on earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father and a daughter against her mother. Well, I thought communism, all that probably explains that. But it went on, of course, a mother and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes will be those of his own household. And then, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. And I just, I could not think that was the situation. But of course, it became pretty obvious that it was, that I had to decide which comes first here. Have I really given myself to Jesus and to whatever he wants me to do? Or can I somehow keep the relationship of closeness and so forth with my mother and father? And it was completely new to me and kind of alien, to tell the truth. Except that I knew the other bits where Jesus had said the opposite, where he said you ought to honor your father and mother and don't make an excuse for not giving to them because you say you've given it to God. So obviously he was for honoring father and mother, but when it came to him or the father or mother, he was very clear that God comes before everyone else. And so it was a rather a battle for me, to come to that. In other words, it did become more obvious because there were things that, while my father was all for it, my mother was not at all. And so really I was apparently throwing my life away, and all that sort of thing. So it required great determination. And of course, 19 and 29 is really the same thing. Matthew 19:29. I knew them because I needed all the help I could get here in those days. Matthew 19 and 29. And I believe that's it, if I'm reading it right. Matthew 19 and 29, I think. And anyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or children or lands for my name's sake will receive 100-fold and inherit eternal life. And of course that tied up with later on, when I then had to leave completely, of course, and go to other places. But suffice it to say, you can see that it wasn't an easy thing for me. It was quite a struggle and quite a battle, and one that was very real and that I had to sort out in order to go on with Jesus. And it came up several times, my mother had difficulty with childbirth, and the happy old doctor said, what you need to settle your nerves is, of course, smoke, So, of course, she started to smoke. And so the time came, when the old one breast went, and the time eventually came when I think I was teaching in St. Anthony Village High School, maybe at that time. And she was near death, and so I got off school for 2 weeks and went and was with her in the cancer ward, and talked and prayed. But then, of course, I had to go back to school, and I was back in school, 3 weeks, and of course, word came that she was dying, well, I couldn't get off school again, that was a big thing to get off when I did. And so I didn't get to her funeral, so there was all this agony, my brother felt I was very disloyal and so forth. So it all came home very realistically to me that following Jesus often meant breaking with parents. And of course that came home again then to both Marion and Mary, and I thought they did the right thing, that's what I did. I couldn't go the second time, and when Mary asked, I said, you should do what you want, you should do what you think is right. And of course Marion the same, and I think all of us guys know especially, how much his father meant to him, But he was in no doubt, and of course it was good he came from that Mennonite background. They were in no doubt, The missionaries do not come home every time there's a death, and so I thought that was you had to do what you had to do. So, and all of you have to do what you have to do. But I want you to know that there are many of us who have had to make the choice, and that there is a way to go that the world does not always approve of, and it's essential to be able to face that. And I thought it was important to say that to all of you, because some of us have still mums and dads, that are alive, and it's more important. It's not so important in a way what you do at that time. It's important where your heart is. It's important where your heart is. Your heart is either for God, whatever that costs, or it's kind of mostly with God, And I had to sort out too what security I was still depending on with my mother's love or my father's love, because you seem, there's a theology that is well known in ministerial circles, that for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, and it's very important to leave your father and mother. And some people don't leave their father and mother. They marry, but they never leave their father and mother. And so there is a real attitude that one has to take in order to grow up and to be adult. And I do think that part of that is really really looking to God alone for your security and for your protection. And really at last, no longer being a child depending on your dad or your mum to give you that security, even if it's just emotional security, not material. And in a way, you are always a crippled adult until you finally, dare I say, die to the security that either emotional or material that you get from your dad and mum, you know. So it is a real choice that you make. And we've come up against it, as you all know, year after year, you know, especially as the dads and mums come to the time when they'll be going. And I thought I'd share it with you because I couldn't understand. First of all, Greg probably knows, I couldn't understand why Joanne was crying. You know, I had no idea. I thought it was my roughness of voice that was saying it. But I do think that, especially when you're very sensitive and very affectionate, I do think it's a battle that you have to face, and it can be hard. As far as the relative values of things, of course, for the two of us, you know, it's just been very clear. God has called us to something, and you go, and you make whatever sacrifices are necessary for that. And you know, I talked yesterday of employees and employer and all that kind of thing, and we both had to see it ourselves, because even in a sense, when you're a dentist working for somebody else, you're an employee. And certainly as a school teacher, I was an employee for many years, either of the church or of the school. So we were both very aware of what an employee was, and we were both super aware of the difference. When you were no longer the employee, you were responsible for the wretched business. You were responsible for it and for other people who depended upon it. So it changed your whole attitude, and of course, there's never a question. And you know, I assume it's for other small business owners and large, but especially small. When there's a question of the business or what you want, there is no decision to make. It's made for you, you know. And that's always been with us. There's no decision. I mean, it's like saying, do you want to blow the business up or do you want not to blow the business up? Well, usually you decide, no, we'll not blow the business up. So that's what God has called us to. Actually, I don't own anything except I own Crown Jewelry, but I don't own the rest. We signed it all over to Marion Mary. You know. Now, if we need, we can sign it back, or we can sign it over to Gray, or we can sign it over to you. But it's not the owning, the legal owning, it's the attitude. It's the attitude of an owner. It's not whether you're an employee or an owner, it's what is your attitude, the attitude of an owner or an employee. And I think that's what is concerning. And that's what, it's always, if ever we can't face another flight in coach, you know, because it's so tight and uncomfortable, the lady insists that we buy the extra, you know, that Crown or CCI don't do it. And I think that's the attitude of an owner, you know. you don't charge the company for things that the company really isn't responsible for. And as much as possible, you save the company, even at your own expense. And it seems there are times when we've cancelled a flight, and the money is gone. But you do whatever is needed that will help the situation in Thailand, or whatever is needed that will help the situation in England. And that comes first, And your own comfort and your own well-being and even your own money comes second. And it seems to me that that's part of being an owner. And I suppose it's probably good to explain that clearly to you so that we're all clear on it, and so that we all have that attitude, because that's what we are. Everybody, people presumably look to you often as the owner, often look at you as the owner of this place. And maybe Chris thinks of me, I don't own this. Actually, Mary own it, So it's all in our attitude. Do we have an attitude of responsibility for this? That means that whenever there's a choice, this comes first, Not because it's this, but because it's God's. We are, in a way, we are owners, but really I see us as stewards of God. It's really God's operation. It's God's business. And we are just stewards that look after it, for the time that we're here. So I hope that will help all of us as we think of the thing. I think Mary happened to say, I noticed I glanced at the email when I came down, and she said she was anxious for the London family to see this because it had been such a blessing to her, and there is such a deliverance in the cross. Is that what she said? There's such a deliverance. I think that's were her words, There's such a wonderful deliverance in the cross from carnality. And so, of course, it's fun for me because I thought they'd watched all these. Well, dear love them, they haven't seen a lot of this stuff because they were here, So I think there is a great deliverance for us in this whole area, and I would encourage us all to go forward and grasp it with all our hearts. The verse that I had, which was originally the only thing I was going to do, but all this came to me this morning, is, and I thought we'd just, it's 10:30, so we could have half an hour, of quiet prayer. And the verse that I got was very clear, so I'm using it, appropriate or not, Psalm 95 and verse 6. So that you can have that open, and while you're praying or being quiet, you might want to meditate upon it. Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord, our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand.